Hi, Jon McCarty here. Welcome to LSAT Anonymous.
Hi, John.
How are you?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm doing well also. Did you have a fake name you wanted to use today?
Jessica, yes.
Okay, Jessica, fantastic. So, yeah, I got some notes on what you're struggling with a little bit, but fill me in a little more about where you are in the study process for the LSAT and tell me a little bit about what your goals are. And then we'll dive into some specifics. I think we're going to cover weekend and sufficient assumption today, correct?
Yes.
Okay,
So
yeah, give me some context.
basically, so I think my issue is with sufficient assumptions, like adding them to the answer choice adding the answer choices into the argument has been difficult to find like what really is the sufficient
Mhm.
assumption. And then with the weekend, I just for some reason have not just been able to really understand how to like attack those types of arguments. I would say those like two have been like my hardest, but this would probably be like my last day to kind of study because in the next 2 hours is my exam. So I have my exam at 3:30 today, so I'm pretty anxious, but I'm gonna just try my best. Yeah, and that's kind of where I'm at.
Okay. So knowing that, let's not try to lift anything too heavy today, but let's try and brush up some of the fundamentals that I think will really help. Um,
Okay.
so yeah. So let's start with weekend questions because for me, I feel like weekend questions are the basis for any question type that contains an argument, including sufficient assumption questions.
Mm.
So whenever I read an argument on the LSAT, there's whenever I read a stimulus, even there's a few things that I'll do. First, I'll determine if it's an argument, and then if it is, the first thing I will do is isolate the conclusion, and then I will make an attempt to weaken that conclusion.
Okay.
And that's all before I even read the question stem. Now, that's kind of my process. You don't have to mimic that. And certainly,
Mm.
I wouldn't change your process at any point in time before, 2 hours before the exam. But it can give you a sense of like how fundamental this skill is. I do it on every single question that has an argument. I will weaken it first because from that point of weakening, I can then, if it is a weaken, I can just do what I did already. If it's a strengthen, I can
Mm.
flip it on its head and then I'm strengthening, right? If it's
Hmm.
all question, I can describe how I weaken the argument. If it's a parallel, I can parallel using the same weak reasoning that was originally used.
Hmm.
So you can kind of pivot from that point to a lot of other points. And other people will do this with other question types too. Sometimes people find necessary assumption to be super intuitive, and then they'll look for the assumption in every argument, which is another way of kind of doing the same thing. But I prefer to like actively attack the argument. It just seems
Mm.
for me.
Mm. And when you attack the argument, are you just looking for like flaws in the argument, or what do you mean by attack?
Right. So I am looking to say the conclusion is ultimately not supported, but when I'm doing it,
Mm.
I'm trying to say this conclusion's potentially wrong. And not
Okay.
that it is wrong or that I'm proving that it's wrong, but that they haven't uh, proven to me that the conclusion is correct. There's some sort of gaps
Mm.
there, and I'm going to exploit those with some new information that wasn't mentioned and say, like, well, what about this or what about that? Or this could have happened, and that would mean that your conclusion might not be true. And that, there's some areas where the conclusion isn't fully supported, and then like exploiting those. Because on weekend questions, the whole name of the game is attacking the conclusion only. You cannot attack the support given for the conclusion. So you have to
Mm.
accept the support as factually accurate and say, all right, even if all of that stuff is true, I still don't buy your conclusion because of X, Y, and Z.
Mm.
Are you actively like isolating conclusions when you read logical reasoning stimuli? Are you like, here's my conclusion, I know exactly what it is?
Yes, but I think sometimes when I'm reading the stimulus, like I think sometimes if I'm honest, like I like look for indicator words and things like that, but then it can sometimes get a little confusing, like what the real like main conclusion is. But that is a starting point that like most of my tutors were saying, like start with the conclusion and then kind of look at the structure of the argument or the reasoning, and then attack from like do an assessment and then attack from there.
Yeah.
But yeah, that is like something that I start with. But then somehow when I'm looking at, I think I go into the answer choices and then I get like unconfident about what the correct answer could be. Maybe it's because I haven't isolated the conclusion properly.
Yeah, and sometimes when I'm lost in the answer choices, what I'll do is I'll glance back up and reread that conclusion really fast because then it retargets me back to what I'm trying to do.
Okay.
And a lot of times, so in a digital exam, maybe having a highlighter and highlighting like the first word of the conclusion so that your eyes can find it super easily. But yeah, anytime I'm lost, kind of my North Star is getting back to that conclusion because that's the thing I want to attack. And if you compare your answer choice to the conclusion, it'll be pretty obvious to you in that moment whether it's attacking it or not, if you get a reread on it.
That's okay. That's really good. I'm taking notes as you speak. That's really helpful, actually. Thank you.
And some of that test taking strategy is really important where you're setting yourself up for success, and everybody's is going to be a little bit different. A lot of times when it's like a weak and accept, people will highlight the word accept because like it's pretty easy to lose that once you get to answer choice D and then you click on that weak instead of the accept. So even though it's like a super simple thing, but you're like, all right, I can't lose points on super simple stuff either. And going back and re-referencing that conclusion is kind of one of those little tricks for taking the test that can be really helpful for all question types too.
Yeah, I definitely have gotten the answer wrong because I didn't see the word accept or just forgot about it. So yeah, that's a good tip.
Very common, very common. And everyone's lost points, at least on practice tests, because of the word accept. So the important thing is to not lose any points on test day because of the word accept. Like you don't want to lose any points that you are capable of getting to simple mistakes or like things that you could have put in a system to prevent yourself from, accidentally making that mistake.
No, that's very true.
So on weekend questions, are you up to speed on the fact that you cannot attack the premises, that you have to like leave them alone and only attack the conclusion? Is that something that's like seared into your brain, or is that something that's still maybe a little bit malleable for you?
That is a little bit malleable because I think it's because when I spoke to my other tutors, they were saying something about like the reasoning structure, and that felt very like, vague. And so I was like, oh, should I be looking at the premises? And like, if there's something that also doesn't like, maybe if it goes against the premises, then should I like take that answer as the correct answer? Like it was just, I think that's been kind of confusing for me, if I'm honest.
Yeah, and that is a bit vague, right? The attack the reasoning structure. Well, what does that mean?
Yeah.
Right? So I hear you there. Yeah. So when they're talking about that, the reasoning structure that they're referring to is the premises should 100% support the conclusion in a valid argument. On a weekend question, they will always fall short. Every single weekend question starts with a flawed argument because on the LSAT, it's impossible to weaken a perfectly strong argument, a valid argument, because the LSAT will not allow you to attack the premises. So if you have the premises that lead 100% to the conclusion and you're not allowed to attack the premises, well, there's no entrance there to attack that argument as far as the LSAT goes. Now, in the real world, you would question some of the premises. You would say, well, I don't know if this is right or this is right. But on the LSAT, you can't do that. So you're always starting with this flawed argument. And when you're looking at the reasoning structures, you're really just saying, do these premises 100% support the conclusion? No. All right. Now, why? All right. There's a gap. And then what could happen in the space of that gap that would hurt that conclusion?
Okay.
So premises are 100% factually accurate, but we don't buy the fact that they lead to this conclusion. So this conclusion is not factually accurate potentially, and we're going to actively try to make it so it's not factually accurate, or that it hasn't been proven to be factually accurate. So there's
Mm.
like a bit of wiggle room there where you don't have to destroy the conclusion. That works. That's great if an answer choice does that. You need to cast doubt. So
Mhm.
something that would make you question that conclusion's truth more is
Mm.
also valid.
Okay. So for when you say looking for the gap, should the answer choice be one that like maybe destroys or casts doubt based on what the gap is or what the gap in the reasoning is? Then is that what you
Yeah.
mean by the? Mm.
Yep. So if they have, their argument is usually sounds pretty good.
Mm.
If you're like not being super critical on it and you're just like reading it casually,
Mm.
you may be like, oh, that
Yeah.
sounds right. But
Mm.
then when you get in there really analytically, you say like, well, but actually they didn't say this thing, and I kind of gave them that for granted, but they never said that that was true. So if that's not true, that would really hurt the argument. So that's where that
Mm.
gap kind of comes in, where like it's also like necessary assumption kind of is in there too. That
Yeah.
idea of there's this assumption, and maybe I let them take it for granted. On the LSAT, we don't let them take anything for granted. We are nitpicky
Mm.
like crazy going through that and be
Mm.
like, did they establish this thing? Did they establish that thing? And if they didn't
Mm.
fully do it, then we're gonna exploit it. We're gonna make them pay for it.
Okay. Oh no, that makes a lot of sense. Okay.
And
Hmm.
then on these ones, you always you want to, at least when you're studying. Now you're going into the test in a couple hours, so you may not be able to implement this to the highest degree that you may want. But if you do start a
Yeah.
restudy process, if for some reason January doesn't work out and you're looking for April,
Mm-hmm.
weekend questions are great questions to work on your predicting skill. So once
Okay.
you have the argument, once you've isolated the conclusion, once you know that it's a weekend question, before you read any of the answer choices, to
Mm.
look at that and say, all right, what in my mind am I going to say to weaken this argument that I think the LSAT will say in one of these answer choices? So you're
Mm.
predicting what you think the right answer will be. And then you're in this
Okay.
like position of power going through the answer choice. Like, you're like, I know what I'm looking for. And even if it doesn't say what I thought, anything that exploits that gap that I was exploiting, even if it's in a different way, I'll recognize that too and be able to choose that answer choice.
Okay. Hmm.
You want to try a little simulated, super simple weekend exercise?
Yes, please.
Okay. So I'll give you an argument, and then I want you to kind of just walk me through your process, and then I may interject at certain points and ask you questions and probe a little bit. So
Okay.
if we have a simple argument such as the majority of people who smoke cigarettes end up getting lung cancer, therefore smoking cigarettes causes lung cancer.
Hmm.
So walk me through what your thought process would be, and you know that this is a weekend question.
So to me, it sounds a little bit like circular reasoning. It's saying like one causes the next, and therefore, or maybe it's like a causal flaw by saying like one causes the next, but there isn't any alternative reason as to why smoking causes like lung cancer. Did you say lung cancer?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so yeah, like it doesn't really
Yeah,
give
it's hard when
us.
it's not in front of you reading it, right? So you're using your memory.
Sorry.
Let me
Yeah.
recite it again to you, and then so you can kind of like get another like a reread on it. So the
Okay.
majority of people who smoke cigarettes end up getting lung cancer.
Mm.
Therefore, smoking cigarettes causes lung cancer.
Mm. Yeah. So when I see the majority, I think of like maybe most.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think of like 51, like over 51% get this lung cancer. And
Mm-hmm.
I think, how can it be proven? Well, it hasn't really given me any like justification or any reason, like any real premises, like to really back it up. And so my attack would be, I think I would take it maybe from like I would make like maybe a diagram, like a conditional like logic diagram or like symboling to show that X causes Y. Maybe do a contrapositive and look at the answer choices to see maybe if there is an alternative reason for why it caught, like why, maybe what else can cause lung cancer, and maybe why smoking might not be the only cause, or might not be like the majority of it causing lung cancer. That was very poorly stated, but
No, yeah, it's good. Like I like the stream of consciousness because it lets me kind of know where your mind is at, and we can do some really good diagnosing that way. So, what's the conclusion? Let's start there because it seemed like you have it, but I want you to tell me the conclusion.
So it's saying that smoking causes lung cancer.
Yes, right. So you're right. We have this causal conclusion, and then we start getting into these causal ways to attack it. What's the premise that they have?
So I believe they said like, was it someone who, like, I think it was just like maybe I forget the first line, but I guess it was like majority. Yes, the majority of people, have this who smoke have this lung cancer, and therefore it means that, it will cause lung cancer. Smoking will cause lung cancer.
Right. So you can see how if we're not being super critical and we hear that, we're like, yeah, it kind of makes sense, right? If the majority of people who smoke get lung cancer, probably smoking causes lung cancer. So like it's kind of one of those things that like, yeah, it makes sense. And also we know this from like the real world, but now they're asking us to do something that's kind of like against what we know and against what we think of, which sometimes they'll do. They'll make you take a position that you're not used to taking, which is like, hey, maybe smoking doesn't cause lung cancer is kind of the thing we're trying to do now, right? Which is a little uncomfortable given, what we know about smoking and lung cancer. So that first sentence, that premise, in my mind, instead of remembering the details of it, because it's kind of hard, right? And we don't have it here in front of us. And as you're going through the answer choices, you're going to be kind of balancing this in your mind as you're going through the answer choices.
Okay.
So instead of remembering like the majority of people who smoke get lung cancer, all I'm thinking is that there's a correlation, because that's what we have going on here. They're correlated, right? That these two things happen a lot together. In fact, the majority of the time, when people do one thing, the other thing also occurs. So then they're drawing this causal connection from this correlation. And correlation to causation is one of the most common concepts that you'll see on the test. So it's important to have this like really crystal clear in your head. Whenever they say two things happen a lot together, all right, there's a correlation. And then whenever they conclude causality, we have an immediate objection that correlation does not establish causality. Now, there were a few other things that you started to bring in there, which I think can kind of cloud your thinking a little bit, or make it like have your thinking going in too many different directions at once.
Okay.
Causality is completely different from conditionality. So causality, we're saying that one thing actively makes another thing happen, and conditional reasoning, they're just saying that when one thing occurs, another thing, we also know that another thing will occur. So we didn't really have any conditional language, which you'd be looking for like if-then statements, all, unless. In fact, one of our statements was a majority of. So if anything, we're in this kind of quantifier realm. But as soon as they go to causality, I would turn my mind straight to causality and stick on that and forget about quantifiers, forget about conditional reasoning, arrow diagrams. If you want to create a little causal diagram, you can, but it shouldn't be that arrow that you use for conditionality, because that means something very specific.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah. So part of the strategy is like knowing where to turn your focus to, because you need all of your processing power on one thing, on the correct thing. And if you have quantifiers floating around like some, most, and all, and then you're like, all right, what conditional reasoning, if then, and unless statements, and then you have causality kind of floating around. It's really hard. Even the highest skilled LSAT takers can't juggle that much information and be super accurate with it. So part of your job is to like narrow it down to like what's happening here so that I can
Okay.
deal in this very narrow band of what's happening.
That's really helpful. Thank you.
Of course, yeah. And then so once you get in this narrow band, you say, oh, I'm weakening a causal argument. I've done this before. There's a few main ways that they do it. And then you can have these memorized and locked and loaded and ready to go. And you said one of them, which is the most common one, is like maybe something else is happening, right? An alternative cause to the smoking being the cause. Maybe it's these people also have poor lifestyle choices, maybe their diets or something, or they're more likely to eat highly processed foods, or they live in areas that have more environmental pollutions and they breathe those in, and that's actually what's causing the lung cancer rather than the smoking. So you start to think, and that can be your prediction. That's usually what I'll predict is some sort of alternative cause. Environmental pollutants that they're inhaling, that seems like a pretty good alternative cause. Because it's dealing with the lungs, it's dealing with inhaling, and it's also putting smoke in a category that are just more likely to be exposed to those things. So that's one way to weaken causality. But like as soon as I see that I'm weakening causality, this quick cascade of ideas goes through my head. So I'm like really targeted. I know what I'm doing, and then like I'm thinking, all right, I can find an alternative cause. I can find the cause without the effect. Now this is going to be hard because the correlation was just the majority. But if we can find a group of people who are smokers, who none of them get lung cancer. So maybe we look at, the people in Italy or something, right? These people smoke cigarettes. And this is not true by any means. But if they said this, we would have to accept it as true and go with it. Like people in Italy, they smoke cigarettes and they seem to smoke a lot of cigarettes and they do it over a long period of time and none of them get lung cancer. So then you would say, well, man, is it the smoking or is it something else, right? Because we have this big population where we're not seeing this correlation whatsoever. And so it does cast doubt. Now, we would wonder other things there, but it would cast doubt. It wouldn't destroy the argument, but it would cast doubt.
Okay.
So what I'm understanding and cause without the effect. Go ahead.
So sorry. I just wanted to double check. So with the weakening questions, are we don't want to destroy the argument, or is it just meant to? Oh, I see. Okay.
We want to. Yeah, but we don't, that's not our bar. We need to know like where the bar is that we have to clear is we have to cast out. Now, if you clear that bar just barely, good, you got it. If you destroy the argument and you clear the bar by a mile, hey, that's great too, right? So we're not like staying away from wanting to destroy the argument. We're just saying not what we need to do to get to the right answer, but it certainly would be the right answer.
Okay. No, that makes sense.
Yeah, so we're kind of thinking like the minimum amount that we need for a correct answer choice. And then there's this huge range above that too. And the minimum amount we need is for us to say, if that's true, I'm not sure about this conclusion. Like that's as far as we need to go from weakening questions.
No, that's helpful. Yeah.
So then like when we're weakening causality, the third thing I'm looking for is effect without the cause. Usually you can do this using the timeline because causes always come before effects. So if you can try to put the effect before the cause, then you can effectively say, well, this effect was happening before this cause ever got here. So I'm not sure about this being, this is actually the cause. With smoking, that may be hard, but we could say like before the popularization of smoking cigarettes, our lung cancer rates were at 80%. And then when cigarettes were introduced, our lung cancer rate dropped to 51% or something. Where you're showing that like, all right, well, before people were smoking, we still had this problem. Once people were smoking, actually the problem became less. So you can use some of the temporal aspects of cause and effect to work it. But this stuff, like when you're really dialed in, this is happening in milliseconds. I know this is for us, this is taking, minutes. But once you get this really dialed in, this is milliseconds of just like, oh, I'm weakening causality. They're based on a correlation. I can do these three things. I'm going to predict an alternate cause. They're breathing in something else that's causing the lung cancer. They're just more likely to be exposed to that thing. And then I'm into the answer choices. It should be like, once you get dialed in, it should be that fast. So I know it feels like a lot now, but as you
Wow.
work it, it can get better.
Okay. And I wonder what happens, because another issue I've been having is like maybe if I come down to like two last contender answer choices and I'm like, I don't really know which one maybe weakens it a bit more. Should I just kind of do what you said, previously, which is just to reread the conclusion and then go from there? Or is there like maybe a tip around that? Because I oftentimes will
Sure.
second guess and then just choose the wrong answer.
Yeah, and that's super common. So I've got a few things for you on that. So the
Mm.
first thing is knowing the minimum benchmark for a correct answer choice, like we spoke about. You just have to clear that bar, right? That
Mm-hmm.
it does cast out. So if that's our minimum expectation for a correct answer choice, is it possible for one answer choice to just clear that bar just barely, another one to clear it pretty readily, and then one to totally destroy the argument?
Mm.
What do you think? Do you think that the LSAT
I
can
think,
do like have three answer choices that are technically correct and one is more correct than the others?
I somehow feel like what I was told is that they oftentimes will be like two like contenders, like maybe one is like there's like the always just the one right answer, but then there's one that's a little tricky, and then there's obviously answer choices that are maybe out of scope or irrelevant,
Mm-hmm.
and so or that just kind of restate the same like main the argument in different words. So what I do with those questions, it's been difficult because I, have been like, maybe there's just like a word or something that I miss. And then that
Mm-hmm.
kind of, is a problem. But yeah, I think I was watching a YouTube video and they had said that like the one that like weakens it more out of the two, which again, I feel
And a
like
lot of
I don't
people,
really know.
yeah, and there is a lot of that advice going around out there. That's why I just wanted to make sure that, like in your head, that you have this super clear. If it clears the
Okay.
bar, it's right. So there is
Okay.
no way for them to clear the bar and then clear it higher and then higher. There's no such thing, because then they're requiring you to say, well, if I show the cause without the effect, that's a better weakening than showing the effect without the cause. And I don't know, is it like
Mm,
you're casting down one way, you're casting down another? So
yeah.
one thing to correct is that there is one correct answer choice. If there's only one
Mm-hmm.
that clears that bar, and then so you're right though. There's usually two that look like they do, right? And so it's not
Mm,
that they're totally irrelevant and they don't appear to clear the bar. One of them does, but
mm,
I think your instinct of like, maybe I missed a word, rereading
mm,
that conclusion can help you get a lot of the specifics that are necessary to parse
mm,
between the correct answer choice that actually does it and the incorrect one that falls short for a very specific reason, that
mm,
you may not remember that the conclusion had this like little word in it, and then that's what that answer choice is playing off of. And if you reread the conclusion, that it can give you some clarity. So yes, if I'm down
mm.
to two on a weakened question, I know one of them weakens and one of them's tricking me, and I can't see
Yeah.
why it's tricking me. So I need some more
Mm,
clarity. So I can reread the answer choices, but also I need to go back up and reread that conclusion, because that's
okay.
probably going to be the thing that helps me veer in the right direction.
Mm, mm-hmm.
For the people who think that one is better than the other, they're just not seeing the clear reason why the incorrect answer choice fails. And there is a clear
Yeah.
reason. You may not always see it on test day either. And even the best test takers, there will be at least one or two questions where they feel like, ugh, I'm not sure, but this one feels better for some reason, and they go with it,
Yeah.
and they're right most of the time, or a proportion of the time. But
Mm,
know that there is something there, because it's
okay.
important to know. Because if you don't, then you don't look for it, and if you're not looking for it, you'll
Mm.
never.
Oh, that's very helpful. Mm. Okay.
So yeah, that's kind of weakened questions in a nutshell for me, anyways.
Mm,
First, recognizing that it's a weaken, isolating the conclusion, actively attacking it, and then kind of condensing the argument down into something small that I can hold, like correlation to
okay.
causation. Like I can hold that really
Mm,
easily, versus like,
okay.
they said the majority of these people are doing this thing, and then this is causing that, and then like trying to get too much of the details, versus like holding something small and tight, and then referencing back to the conclusion for those small details when the time comes.
Mm. So would
and
you
having a
say that like, sorry?
and having a really good prediction going into the answer choices. So I'm like
Oh,
clear
I
and
see.
moving in one direction.
Yeah,
But your question
yeah.
there.
I guess I was like thinking about what are common issues in the argument. Is it usually the case that there's like correlation and then, when it really is establishing like causation, or would you say that there's like other common like weakening type, argument styles, I guess you could call them, or
Yeah, there certainly are.
Mm,
Correlation and causation is one of the most common, if not the most
okay.
common for weakened questions. Um,
Oh.
but a lot of times there won't be anything really specific
Mm.
happening that you say like this, this concept is happening, other than the fact that they didn't get you all the way to the conclusion within the argument, that they
Oh,
missed some key piece that would have gotten you there, or maybe they set it up
okay.
so that you might assume that that's happening, but they never said it. A lot of times they'll try to bait
Mm.
your own mind into doing that for you, because we're used to giving people the benefit of the doubt when we're talking to them and filling in the gaps
That's
of
so
their words for conversation and things like that. We're like really good at doing that without noticing, and the LSAT does fail.
Yeah, that is very true. Like I think about some of the questions that I've missed have been like maybe me making the assumption, but it actually was never stated in the argument. So, that's very
Yeah,
true.
but anytime I think something's a part of the argument, but I'm not sure, I'll go back and be like, where's the black and white text where they made this a part of the argument? And if I can't find
Mm,
it, oh, they got me again. Like I
yeah.
put that in there for them. There's a
Yes.
really great LSAT question, like this, and I forget the details of it, but the assumption was so obvious that even when people were are told the answer, they just can't accept the fact that that wasn't a part of the argument already, because it's just it's like it's so
Wow.
hard to see that you're doing that actively on most of these arguments to help make them make sense, but we have to like
Yeah.
kind of turn that off in our head. That's why I like
Okay.
to approach all questions from a very skeptical, weakening mindset,
Mm,
because it helps me turn that off. Instead of saying like I'm
mm,
giving you the benefit of the doubt, it's like I'm coming after you, I'm attacking
yeah.
you from the start. If you didn't say that, you haven't established that, and like this conclusion is falling
Mm,
apart because of this, and like it helps like turn off that the thing that we do in regular conversation.
right. Okay. No, that makes a lot of sense. Hmm.
So how do you feel, I guess, as far as weekend questions go now, and maybe the
I
test a little bit
feel
more?
Yeah, I feel a lot more like a bit better because I think, with the weakening, sometimes when I went into the argument, I didn't really know what my approach should be. Like I would read the question and reread it sometimes, and then just kind of like I would let the answer choices kind of like guide me. And
That's a
what I
scary place to
realized,
be honest. Yeah,
yeah, it
it's
really
very uncertain
is.
when you get there, and you're just like the answer choice is just like pushing you around, and you're like, maybe this, but maybe
Yeah,
that.
maybe
Like
it's
it's really
that.
hard.
Yeah. So that was a really, tough time for me because I would just kind of be like, then I would look at different questions and be like, well, technically, I guess it could be this, I guess. And then,
Mm-hmm.
it would just take up a
And
lot of my time.
that's where everyone loses all their time. People think they need to read
Mm,
faster. That's not it. You need to, or that they
mm,
don't have time to predict their answer choices. That's not it either. The place you're losing time is when you're in those answer choices and you're debating this or debating that. And then, like that debate process keeps your mind actively busy. So you don't recognize how
mm.
much time is actually clicking by while you're
It's
doing that.
actually, yeah,
Where
yeah.
most of it goes. Yeah. But if you can go
Mm,
into those answer choices armed with like, I've got my conclusion in one hand, I've got my prediction in the other hand, and I'm coming down into these answer choices with clarity as to what happened and what I
okay.
think will work, you find that you're like dealing with the answer choices instead of the answer choices like dealing with you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, that makes a lot of sense. Hmm. Yeah.
And really, any argument that you get to, you can take that initial approach of like, what's wrong with this argument? Like that's like the
Mm-hmm.
knee jerk reaction. Like, well, what's wrong with this? Because almost all the arguments on the LSAT are flawed arguments. Um,
Yeah.
because you can't weaken an already good argument like we spoke about before. You can't strengthen it if it's already perfect. There's nothing left to do. You can't find a sufficient assumption because there are no assumptions. They're necessary assumptions. There's no flaws. You can't parallel the flaw. Like all of those question types require you to start with an already poorly formed argument.
Yeah. And so would you just say that with strengthening the argument, it would just be the opposite of this? Or do you think it's like,
That's why I love starting with the weakening, because if you start with trying to strengthen, you may be giving them the benefit of the doubt in areas that they don't deserve it. If you start weakening, you can find those areas easier. And then all you do is you reverse it. So if this was a strengthen question, we could take away an alternative cause. We could say, actually, these people are spread out unanimously through socioeconomic, geographic areas. They're not exposed to any environmental toxins at a higher rate than other people. Before people started smoking cigarettes, there was 1% incidence of lung cancer. Now there's 15%, and that happened at the same time smoking started. Every single group who smokes cigarettes has a very high rate of lung cancer. So we're like the effect without the cause without the effect, these alternative ideas that we came up with. You can just remove any of those, and that'll be a good strengthener.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Well, that's really helpful. Oh,
and then if we wanted to describe the flaw, we would just say, they assumed a correlation establishes causality. That's the flaw that they did. So we know what the flaw is. We could parallel that flaw. We could parallel this argument very easily. Just correlation, causation. That's super easy to do. We could describe it. We can strengthen it. It would be hard to do a sufficient assumption on this kind of question, but we could come up with some necessary assumptions, and we may be able to find a sufficient assumption that would work. Usually sufficient assumptions, they like to have better arguments than correlation and causation. You usually won't see that in sufficient assumption. Because it's almost impossible to prove a causal relationship. So if for you to create a sufficient assumption, you would almost have to have a circular argument to be able to get there. And have its own flaws, right? So sufficient assumptions would use conditional reasoning a lot more, because conditional reasoning can become airtight, which is what you're doing on sufficient assumption ones.
So for sufficient assumption questions that don't use because I don't know if I'm super confident about translating for conditionality, but for sufficient assumption questions, do you think the goal is just to find an answer choice that guarantees the conclusion? Is that just a way to once I see the question type to just kind of approach it? Sorry.
Yeah, but you can attack it first, right? And that's okay too. And I would attack this. I attack all arguments first. That's my mode of operation. So I would attack the argument, and then I would, in the answer choice, just remove that attack completely, because these arguments do have to be airtight. Like our goal, the justify, like we said, the weakened bar is kind of here. Anything that casts doubt or, destroys the argument, those all count. The sufficient assumption bar is right way up here. It's there's a this tiny bit of answer choices that can fulfill a sufficient assumption question. At the heart of it, though, it is which answer choice strengthens the argument the most. So if you think of it as just the strongest strengthener I can find is going to be right, that will be the right answer. Now, the bar is so high, though, there can be ones that kind of strengthen it but don't prove the answer choice or the conclusion. And those would be wrong here because they do not clear the bar. So knowing where the bar is and how that changes on different question types is super important. Because if you think it's a strengthen and you put the bar here, which is about where the weakened bar is, the strengthened bar too, anything that helps the conclusion, but we're not trying to just help it. We're trying to prove the conclusion. We want that conclusion 100% supported when we add our answer choice on a sufficient assumption question.
Okay.
So it's the strongest strengthener you can possibly have.
Yeah. Wow. Okay.
That's one of the rare question types where strong language in an answer choice is preferable to soft language in an answer choice. because we have to get all the way to the conclusion. So we can't just help it with a
Mm,
sum or help it with a most. Now, sometimes those will be enough to get you there, but an all is always going to be better to get you
mm,
to the conclusion. Because if we can prove everything, then we've got our bases covered. If we
mm,
can prove some or most, we might end up falling a little bit shy, depending on how strong the conclusion is.
mm. Wow, that's very helpful. Yeah. Because sometimes I used to use the idea that like too strong language is not good for any answer choice, but actually, this actually makes a lot of sense that like you would want to, kind of make the argument airtight, and therefore maybe using stronger language is, preferable in this instance. Would you say in the weak instance that like strong language is a good thing, bad thing, or
Don't care on weekend questions. The
okay?
strength of the language doesn't really matter. Same on
Mm-hmm.
strength of questions, because we just have
Mm-hmm.
to cast out, or we just have to add some strength. So even adding
Okay.
some or most or all, like you can do it in a lot of different ways.
Mm-hmm.
Now, necessary assumption questions, strong language is a big red flag, huge red flag on necessary assumption. You want that soft language on necessary assumption. You want that
Oh.
softer language on must be true, right? If an answer choice says all, it's harder to prove than if the answer choice says some on a must be true. And with necessary assumptions, you usually don't need strong language to get there. You usually only need something soft in order to have a chance to get there. But on sufficient assumption, you want the strong language because you just need to get there by any means necessary. So even if you
Mm-hmm.
blow way past and you prove like a whole bunch of other stuff that didn't need to be proved, as long as you prove the conclusion in the process, you're golden.
Wow. Wow. This is very helpful. I wish I spoke to you much sooner, but yeah.
Yeah, well, I'm definitely happy to be here for you now.
Yeah.
You've got the test coming up here shortly. Is there? I guess how are you doing with test day nerves? And
I am not doing very well. I think
okay,
I'm very nervous. I think also because I'm testing remotely, it's like I just don't want anything to kind of go wrong. It's my first time doing like, an electronic test. Like I prefer physical, like I can write on it and like highlight things, and so it's also that, and I think it's just like, overall I would like to get in this cycle. So I just feel like there's just a lot of pressure. So it's kind of been hard to kind of whew, woosah and,
yeah,
calm down, I guess. Yeah.
yeah, it is tough on the day of the test.
Mm-hmm.
You've got about an hour. You can do
Mm-hmm.
maybe take a walk, clear your head,
Okay.
things like that, where you and make sure you have you're eating well and you're well hydrated, but
Mm.
not too well hydrated, where you have to go to the bathroom in the
Exactly.
middle of a session. So,
Yeah. Ooh.
you've got a lot to balance here in the next hour or so, but hopefully,
Mm-hmm.
you've got a few tools now where you can go into the
Yeah.
test and, don't change things up too much because it is test day. You want to rely on the rhythms that you already have, but
Okay.
you can go in and you can be like, all right, I want to make sure that I'm skeptical. I'm isolating conclusions and, trying to, if I get stuck between two answer choices, going back and referencing that conclusion. If you just do that, I think that will really help you on a lot of those 50-50s, bending those to your favor.
Mm. Okay. No, that is extremely helpful. And I'm really glad I got to speak to you because everyone else who I speak to haven't like written the test, or they're just like, you got this. But I'm like, do I really got this? Like it just isn't really helpful advice. And I just
Yeah.
really needed to review with someone because I was just kind of watching YouTube videos, and that like also can be a little draining. And
Yeah.
I was told like by even one YouTuber to, do drills on the day of, and but I was like, oh, I don't know if I really want to do more drills today. Like, I already feel like pretty stressed out. So
Yeah.
that's kind of why I'm really grateful to have spoken to you. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. And on test day, maybe like a light warm up if you want to, but I
Okay.
certainly wouldn't be like, drilling hard on test day. But like,
Oh, okay.
once you're getting ready to go into the exam, if you want to just, I would just, for me, I just think about LSAT concepts and just be like, all right, correlation and causation, conditional reasoning, reading comprehension. I want to make sure I'm doing these few things, and I'm highlighting my accepts. I'm isolating my conclusions, and just like get your mind in the right space for it. But you don't want to, burn any of your fuel out either, right? Because there's only so much fuel for test day. Nerves are a bit higher. Adrenaline's running through your system a little bit more, so you're going to fatigue a little bit faster. So nothing too heavy.
Okay, no, that makes a lot of sense. I think with the advice that you gave me, it's been really helpful to just kind of review. I don't know when you say, but you're not saying like to do. Do you want me to do more drills? Like just like a few, like maybe 12 questions? What do you think?
I would say 12 is too much.
Okay.
Everybody's an individual too. Like some people like a decent warm up. Some people like to stay as fresh as they possibly can. So there's no one size fits all for everybody. If you were going to do anything, you try to find the middle ground. And confidence is a huge issue right now because you're going into test day, not just for you, for everybody going into test day.
Yeah.
And going into the test. So you do not want to do anything that's going to throw you off or any sort of hard question. If anything, like reviewing questions that you've already done, maybe a handful, 3, 4 of those. You're not, but just like going back and remembering your reasoning and looking at some of the things, like, oh, if I use this, where I go back and look at the conclusion, oh yeah, that would have given me some clarity on this one. And, just like really soft stuff where you're just kind of building your confidence and just, again, you're just getting your mind into LSAT mode. You're not trying to do anything else.
For sure. No, that's really, really helpful. Sound advice for sure. Thank you. Thank you so much, Jon.
Yeah, of course. You're very welcome. We're rooting for you. If, give us an email after you take it. Let us know how you felt like it went.
Yeah. Definitely will.
Yeah. Good luck.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. If you need anything, let us know. But take some time, get yourself mentally and physically prepared for the exam, and we'll be waiting for you on the other side.
Yeah. If I don't do well, then you'll definitely hear from me.
Okay. Well, we hope you do well, and that we hear just some great news from you, and we can then post it out there and let people know that you did fantastic. But I really appreciate you calling in, and wish you all the best.
Thank you so much, Jon. Have a wonderful, wonderful day, and bless you. Thank you for your help.
You too. Good luck.
Thank you.